Hello, welcome. I'm Sandbox, and today we are going to be doing a little different video than we usually do on the channel, and that is a tier list. This tier list is going to be a subjective evaluation of the vanilla campaign in Season 3. This is going to go over the design and how I would rate these maps on a scale of exceptional to terrible. And so there will be maps that will inevitably have lower ratings or higher ratings, like Prosperity, that are further along in the campaign, requiring a bigger city, things like that. But I'm not necessarily focusing on that. What I'm focusing on is, from game design perspective, are these maps good to include at that point in the campaign? Meaning that from a modern standpoint, we should look at the campaign and each mission will teach you something. I see this as a big flaw of the original campaign, where it's very clear that either the developers have run out of time to develop these later scenarios, or they just lacked inspiration, because some of the later maps are just without any meaningful terrain features or even challenge to speak of. So we'll be also talking about things that regard military as well as other things, but main things I focus on is, of course, terrain. As if we talked about trade in the vanilla campaign, the trade is overall really lacking, and you will have to labor sponge a lot throughout playing the campaign, meaning that you will have to build surplus services just to get people some jobs so they don't riot, especially playing with Augustus mode. But this will also cover if you play this in Julius. I think this tier list should also take into account how it was played before and how it would feel to play it with Julius today. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and rate the first map ever. So this is map 1. This is a map that starts you as a tutorial, and it teaches you how fire and collapse works, and it is the only map in the whole campaign that has a feature which is in the editor, that is Rome provides wheat. What do I think about this map? I actually don't like it, because it's a very basic scenario, but it inherently teaches the player the wrong things, namely that you are supposed to be developing a city without making any income, and that's a fundamental issue with the game, where economy is the foundation of any city. And it's a bit of a gripe that I have, that these early maps, even Brandisium, only teaches you trade after the city is basically built. And that's not how cities are done in Season 3, especially not on custom maps, but even in the campaign. If you play it on very hard, you often will not have the funds to feed people and then start making money, not to mention that you will be having unemployment issues because you do not have industry and you just feed people immediately, meaning that you will have many surplus workers. Yes, you can then make the industry quickly, but usually opening trade requires an investment to open the trade route, as well as investment in terms of building the actual industry, as well as time to accumulate goods to be then sold. And this just isn't taken into account at all. I do get that the game needs to explain to you what a walker is, what a path is, that you should not use intersections and things like that, yes. But also it fails miserably at explaining how walker behavior actually works, because well, the game doesn't actually tell you, but there are destination walkers and roaming walkers, that even roaming walkers are actually not straight up roaming walkers, but they have destinations for roaming as well. Maybe there should have been a mention of these things, because it is very important. Same as using gatehouses as roadblocks. Maybe there should have been a feature as a roadblock immediately available, or even a gatehouse straight off the bat, because it is very important. Again, without an industry on this map, you will have to labor sponge with a senate, which is a really terrible structure in the base game, where it's basically a glorified massive forum, costs a lot of money, 30 workers, and it basically functions as a forum. So overall, there are many things that are wrong with this mission, so I will personally say it's lackluster. I will not say it's terrible because it still does teach you about not using intersections, which is a good tip because that does mess with Roman walkers a lot. But basically in every other regard this mission fails, and so I would not say it's a good mission for what it sets out to achieve. I'm not rating it as a do you build a splendid city? Of course not. The ratings are basically non-existent on it. But a lot of the triggers are also hidden from the player, because that's how it worked initially. Like, you don't know what you're supposed to achieve with population, and your immigrants suddenly stop until you achieve some goals. Overall, just a confusing experience, and I think it really doesn't go and do it justice to explain to the player how the game itself works very well, and so I do not believe it's a well-designed mission. So going straight up to Brundisium, I would say that Brundisium suffers from the same issues, but with tier makers, we've got tiers, of course, but then you also have where you put the map from left to right is actually like this would be better than this. So in this category, this is better than this one. So I would actually say that Brundisium is slightly better than the first map, meaning you at least do set up trade eventually, but not at the start, and so it teaches you the wrong things again. Also, there's something to be said in vanilla, or like if you don't play with Augustus, even with Augustus, you don't use wells, almost never. So I get that they don't want to overload the player with information, but really a reservoir and a fountain wouldn't have been that much of a big deal. Instead, it teaches you to use wells, which are then basically abandoned, and you only use them for cheats. So yeah, I would say that Brundisium is still pretty lackluster, and I do not like the things it tries to teach the player, because a lot of it is misguided. But at least it's passable due to the fact that you do trade eventually, even though the quotas are still pretty low since it's the normal campaign and it was just suffering from some design decisions that are pretty poor. As for the terrain on Brundisium, it is a little bit varied. At least you do have several places where to build stuff, but it's not very iconic to me, at least. We did do a lot of these maps justice in our Concord, where we really took much better care with the terrain. But yeah, I would say, like, I remember how it looks like from memory at least, so there is that. So after Brundisium, let's raid Capua. So Capua is the first economic mission after the tutorials, and it's okay, but it lacks any sort of challenge. Again, it's like a very open sandbox map. It does have some terrain features. There is a lake, there you have rivers. It has a bunch of fertile land in the south. Like, you will remember Capua, even though it is not exceptionally difficult or iconic. So I would say that Capua is a mediocre map, because it does not really achieve much, but it doesn't fail at anything spectacularly. So after Capua, we will take a look at Tarentum, which Tarentum is the first military mission. Tarentum has two different areas for farmland, which is the first map it has that, and that is good and viable, because that teaches the player that you could perhaps set up blocks elsewhere or use getting grenades to get food from that area, which is important. I don't like generally how military maps don't often give you information where invasion points are very clearly, because there are open edges where no invasion points are in fact, and that is very confusing to the player at start. Also, it does not really explain military well at all, since the first attack is like 3 guys or 4 guys on very hard, which is pathetic. That's nothing. The attacks, you can beat even twice that amount with a single fort, so the numbers are definitely wrong on that. Even with a single fort, you can defend that first attack without any losses at all. So some striking issues with design there. At least there is some terrain. It's not exceptionally well designed. I will remember the layout of it probably forever, but I would say that it's not as iconic as Capua. But then again, as I said, there are at least 2 areas of farmland, and so I do actually think we'll put it in front of Capua in the mediocre category. Okay, so after Capua, after Tarentum, we'll be going to Tarraco. Tarraco is an interesting mission. It is the only mission in the campaign which uses an earthquake. And there's a good reason for it, because the earthquake has a potential to destroy the city and make people rage quit, and that's why it's a bad mechanic. Really, you can't remove the cracks, you can't bridge the cracks, you can't do anything about the cracks, you can just watch it destroy the farmland. If it was placed where your block would be, that would be exceptionally cruel. And even so, on the farmland, there are still people to this very day who complain about it destroying the farmland. Even though you don't need the farmland, there's enough. You don't need the extra farmland that there is. But the thing is that people still don't like it. And ever since it's like a giant earthquake as well, it feels like you just lost like, substantial part of the map. And that just feels bad. So I would say I use earthquakes to limit logistics rather than, destroy a whole part of the map. I would not usually want to use an earthquake like that. But there are a lot of rivers and terrain, and you can still fit standard blocks, but it's not as straightforward as some of the other ones, which are completely flat. So I would say that Tarraco is a very good map, actually. It suffers from some poor decision making, but I would say that's mostly due to design of the features like the earthquake, and inherently it's designed well enough that it provides variety to the player. And it teaches them sea trade a little bit, which is good. Also is the first map at Marvel. Regardless, let's move on. So next up we have Syracuse.
Syracuse is an important site for a new colony. The Empire has a voracious appetite for oil.
And it's this map, and it limits farmland availability, and that is good, because scarcity breeds innovation as well as preciousness of the resource in question. Therefore, players have to learn how to maximize the yield of their farms and how to place them, and you learn that tufts can actually support farms all the way around it, not just on them. Militarily, it's pretty straightforward. The invasion point on the right side can be a bit annoying to a lot of people, but I would say that Syracuse is not a bad map. It suffers from being a flat sandbox map for sure, but it has a cliff. Unfortunately, there's no water source, because in Julius you could not place water on high ground in editor, so you can't really make a good block on the high ground, therefore limiting the usefulness of the area substantially. You use it for military usually, but still I would say that at least it has an iconic theme. You do provide the Empire with oil, and that's the whole idea behind it. All the trade is sea, and there is sea disruptions. So economy-wise, it's actually pretty tough if you've never played it before. It can be a little bit difficult. So I would actually say it is a very good map, and it's not as good as Tarraco because the terrain is a little more brain dead than on Tarraco. So after Syracuse, I will go to Miletus. Miletus is the first map that has you use fishing. Is it a good map? Well, the fact is it's incredibly open, like it's a completely flat desert basically. It's the first desert map in the campaign, which introduces the player to need for more prefects and shorter range on fountains and reservoirs, but there is so much ample space that you really don't need to take much heat about anything. Also, there is a mountain that has like a valley behind it, and there is no reason to go there ever. But in Reconquered we placed farmland there. Right now in this normal version there is farmland very readily available, close to potential dock spots. So I don't hate Miletus, but even the island design, if you look at it, it's like 3-year-old someone drew it with the largest brush, like it's not very well made. And again, it's a very flat, open map. Also, invasion pods are not very clearly demarked, but that's gonna be the guide with basically all military missions. So I would say Miletus is more of a mediocre map, and I would actually say it's better than Capua, because at least it's the desert map and it has the fishing, forcing you to expand their islands, introducing feeder tents properly and things like that. So yes, I would actually think that this is the best spot for Miletus. After Miletus is Mediolanum. Mediolanum is a very heavy military map for how early it is in the campaign, but it has a soul. So there's not much to be said about blockers. There's so much fertile land on Mediolanum. You don't need to use even half of it, but it teaches you that it's okay to build on farmland. There is still also a lot of viable space around it, and all enemies come from the other side of the Alps, but you're actually not told that because the edges are exposed even on the other side. So players who don't pay attention to that detail, that this is in fact the Alps, you would actually be afraid of getting attacked from the other side, and I've seen some people build defenses too. So I would say that's, again, a big gripe with the layout of the defenses, invasion points on the maps in the vanilla campaign. And it features very heavy military action, quite a few trade routes, no sea trade, only land trade. But it's a solid map. You can beat it with only using small Casado, which is disappointing. But that's to be said about all these early maps. Again, I'm not gonna take Prosperity into that much of an account. I'm gonna judge the maps on originality mainly. So I would say Mediolanum is a decent map. I would like it to be in very good category, actually. And I would say it is better than Syracuse. So yes. It also teaches you about choke points. You can roll one of the choke points to let all the enemies path towards the other, and that's very useful to set up a kill zone. But of course it doesn't teach you that with instructions. You have to realize that, but that's actually what you should be doing on that map. Okay, so after Mediolanum we will go to, is next Dinges? It's probably Dinges, right? Dinges is this. At least I think it's Dinges. You let me know. No, sorry, Dinges is a military map. It's like map 11 or something. So what's next? Is it Tarsus? It's probably Tarsus. I'm sorry, some of these maps I just don't remember well at all. Oh no, sorry. I'm sorry, it's Lugdunum, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, Lugdunum is a very iconic map. Lugdunum is actually one of the harder maps in the vanilla campaign, and it features a lot of logistics as well as different areas for different uses which are clearly made for that purpose. No military action, but it doesn't need military to be a good map. It has wolves on it, which forces you to clear them with military that you don't use, because there's no use for military unless you makes you upset. And yeah, due to how it works, I would say requesting meat when there is no access to farmland early on is a bit mean. Also, in Augustus you need food to feed your troops, and all the food is locked behind wolves. No, it's not. There's some on the island actually. So yeah, it's a good map, even with Augustus, I'd say. So it's an first exceptional map, I'd say, that we've run into so far. Next up is Carthago. Oh boy, Carthago. Also, this one is, I have it 2 times. I'm sorry for that. So I'll not be putting 2 of them in. But yeah, so Carthago. Oh boy, there are some problems with Carthago. The people who made the initial city, I don't know who made it, but I'm sorry, but like none of it is good. You are better served just deleting that completely. Not to mention, you start being attacked by natives. So that's another reason why to remove it. You also start with curses of gods on your city. It's just horribly mismanaged, but like to such an extent that it's just a massive pain. So otherwise the mission is okay. There's fishing you need to do for most of your food, which is good. A lot of invasion points and quite heavy military activity that happens quite early. One of the hardest missions in the game, in my opinion, due to the cursed start. But the starting city, it's just so awful. If it's awful by design, then good job. But I prefer to get something at least reasonably useful than this. So I would say Carthago is very good because of the events and the layout, but the initial city is terrible, so I'm gonna be putting it on the end of the spectrum. Okay, so after Carthago, we will look at, I might screw up some of this, sorry, but I might misjudge where certain maps should go with the order. So let's just go ahead and do Tinges. So Tinges, well, Tinges, well, not Tinges, Tarsus. Tarsus is a very open desert map. It has a relatively high prosperity requirement for what people expect in the campaign so far, but it suffers from being very open, and it has fishing for food, no other growing of food, I think. So it's like Miletus, sort of, just no islands, really one island for trade and whatnot. There's mining restrictions because there are not many rocks. So that is that, going for the map. It's not terrible, but I'm not in love with it. I would say it's mediocre, and I would say it's better than... Is it better than Miletus? Yes, because it limits mining. Okay, so after that we'll look at... Now we have Tinges, finally. Probably, right? Yeah. Okay, so Tinges. Oh boy, I don't like Tinges, I'm sorry, but it offers nothing. It has like 2 different spots for farmland. Yeah, great. But even with using that first area, you can basically set up vast majority of the city, and then this is just for like topping it off. It has very poor trade considering how much population you are asked to do, and this is the first map where you go like, oh, I've built half the city, but there is no more money to be made. So you have to do like patricians, but prosperity requirement is so low you don't want to do it. So it's terrible, and also the attacks. It's Numidians, but it's so weak compared to like Carthago attacks. It's so bad. This map is terrible. I'm sorry, I don't like Tinges at all. It's my least favorite map. And for a good reason. It's just a complete sandbox. Nothing more to say about it. Okay, so after we've taken a look at Tinges, next up is Massilia, I believe. Oh, Massilia. No, Massilia is this. This is Valencia. Okay, so Valencia. It's a very open map. It's beatable without removing any trees, which is something. But at least you have the cliff with most of the farmland. It also is beatable without trading at all. Jake did it. DDR Jake did it. Which speaks to how sandboxy this map is. You don't need to use the islands, you don't need to use basically most of the map. I would say it's a sandbox, therefore it's terrible, but it's not as bad as Dangerous. I'm rating this as a campaign, by the way, so like I don't want a sandbox, okay? I play the campaign, I want to be challenged to different missions and that have specific, very well-defined goals. I don't want to go there and like, oh, this is your sandbox, here, have a bunch of implements and do whatever you want. Great, I have such a construction kit for that. Do I need that in the campaign? I'm sorry, but I don't think so. And so you see how clearly these later missions fall into this category more and more because they are very poorly defined and like, I don't know, what was the idea behind it? I'm sorry, but there is just like, I don't feel like I'm challenged or even like tasked with anything specific on that map. So if it had redeeming qualities, I would be willing to bump it up. But to me, I'm sorry, but it's not good. After we looked at Valencia, we have to look at Lutetia, I think. Lutetia is a military map. It's a very big sandbox map. It has all the central farmland, so you build a city in the middle of the map. Quite a few invasion points. You have 3 total. Not many cliffs. That part of the corner of the map is entirely cut off with cliffs, and that's okay. The map is large enough, you can even limit it more. But it suffers from the same issues as other maps. It's very sandboxy, very open and huge. You can build whatever you want. At least the limitation on the farmland means you can't really do too many crazy things. And trade is okay. It teaches you about caravan length, so you don't want ping-ponging caravans. So that's good. And the attacks are large. I would say it's mediocre. It's not good per se, but I don't hate Lutetia. Okay, so after Lutetia, let's take a look. We go to, is it Caesarea? Is it time for Caesarea yet? It's probably Caesarea time, isn't it? I think so. I might be wrong again. If I did this in the wrong order, I apologize. I haven't played a vanilla campaign in a long time. Caesarea. You start with a cursed city, it's terrible. You start with cursed city in more ways than one because you get invaded by Mars, uprising natives immediately. You have some towers and whatnot, but this is a map like Carthago. It makes people rage quit. Not me, but I've seen people complain about this a lot. So from other points, there is no food production, I think, just vine and oil, which is kind of cool. But very lackluster with challenge. It's a smaller map compared to some of these other ones, so at least that is that. You need to make good decision making. But due to this start, I feel like, I don't know. I don't feel like it's as good as Cartago with the iconicness of its nature. I'll put it as lackluster because there are many things wrong with it. After Caesarea, we'll take a look at this is Cartago. We already covered that. Is it time for Sarmisegetusa? It might be. Okay, Sarmisegetusa, multiple invasion points from basically every side, Hunnic enemies which use horse archers, and it can actually be pretty tough to beat. Terrain challenges, not huge. It teaches you about the usefulness of native trade because there are multiple native huts and there's not that great of a trade, so that is good. I would say it's very good. Iconic, maybe a bit hard for some people, but I do not despise Sarmisegetusa. I would say it's better than... It's not as good as Mediolanum in my eyes, but it's as good. It's better than Syracuse. Okay, next. Is it Linden time? It's probably Linden time. Or, not Linden. Londinium. Yes, Londinium is this, I believe. Yeah, it teaches you about dog spots on farmland. There is plentiful amount of it. There are wolves though that eat immigrants. That's a gripe actually with Mediolanum as well as Luteria, which that's horrible. So you are emphasized to like evolve into wolves, and basically you use that feature with wolves terribly. They use them correctly in Luteria to lock the middle wolves in and guard the farmland. Good, great. But other wolves just roaming the countryside is terrible because it forces players to wall them in, and it's very exploitable. Like, you basically make that feature an annoyance rather than a meaningful mechanic, like locking behind certain areas like Denon did is much better. So anyways, yeah, I'm sorry, I don't like Londinium. It's too much of a sandbox for me. I would say I don't dislike it as much as I dislike Tinges, but it's not as good as Valencia. Also, you can still have fun with terrible maps that I rank as terrible, by the way. It's just usually they are very sandboxy. So to me, it's not a campaign experience, okay? Of course, you are free to disagree with any of this, by the way. So I'm not saying like, oh, this is the holy word. No, of course not. You can have your own opinions. Thanks. Yes, we'll be taking a look at Damascus next. Damascus is okay. It introduces competition for water and farms, so you have to source your water where you farm, but there's so much farmland you don't really need to think about it much at all. Very poorly marked invasion points again. I'd say it's lackluster. It doesn't have much special going for it, and I would say Caesarea is worse than Damascus, because at least Damascus doesn't start with a cursed city. Okay, so next we will take a look at Massilia. Massilia is the penultimate economic mission in the base campaign. Is it great? No. It leaves much to be desired. It fails utterly in being a final boss mission, and it's a sandbox. There's farmland on the island, great. There are many more islands for fishing, great. There's military activity, not anything too special, completely open, there's nothing about it. There's a little bit of rocks there. I'm sorry, but I don't like Massilia. I'm gonna put it here. It's not as bad as Londinium in my eyes, but it's pretty bad. And then the last map we have is Lindum. It has some terrain, there are some cliffs. It might not be apparent from this picture, but it also fails. It is a relatively high military mission, but it's a sandbox. Basically, don't even think about it. Build stuff whenever it clearly goes, and then you win. So, as a final mission, again, like, I'm sorry, I can't rank this high. I can't. I'll have to put this I would say Londinium is worse, but also as a final boss missions, these fail miserably. So yeah, this is my tier list of the original campaign maps. I'm sorry if I disappointed someone with their own favorite map being somewhere in the lower tiers. I would say even lackluster maps can be fun, but the terrible maps, I just can't. There are not many redeeming qualities about these. If it's a campaign, I want to be challenged. I want to be tasked with specific things. I don't want a sandbox. If I want a sandbox, I play a map from the city construction kit, or get one from the city haven. So yes, this is gonna be my tier list for original campaign, and thank you for watching, and see you around. Bye.